You got real credentials, real expertise, and you still can't get booked. By the end of this episode, you're going to know the actual reason, and it might not be the one that you're telling yourself. Here's the problem. You spend decades becoming the best in your field. You assume that would be enough. It isn't. And nobody warned you that it would be this hard or told you why this is happening. I work with a lot of second act speakers hitting exactly this wall every week. People whose credentials should open doors and don't. And it traces back to the same fixable causes almost every time. So today I wanted to cover why credentials don't book you, the one shift that separates speakers who get rebooked from speakers who don't, and a real example of a topic that kept landing flat until that shift happened. Welcome to Professional Speaking, the show for people who are serious about speaking and becoming known, booked, and paid. My name is John Ball, professional speaking coach, keynote speaker, stand-up comedian, and sci-fi nerd. I'm here as your guide on the journey to a successful speaking career. I want to start with the feeling rather than the fix, because I think the feeling is where most of you probably find yourself right now. You spend years, maybe even decades, becoming genuinely excellent at something. People came to you for answers. You were the person in the room whose opinion carried weight, whether that was in a hospital, a courtroom, an engineering firm, a classroom, wherever your first career happened to be. And somewhere along the way, you decided that expertise was transferable, that if you'd earned that kind of authority once, you'd earn it again on a stage, and probably faster, because this time you already knew what you were talking about. Then you actually tried it. And the gap between I'm qualified and I'm booked turned out to be far bigger and far more disorientating than anyone prepared you for. Nobody warned you that being right about your subject and being wanted for your subject are two completely different games. So you're left with this quiet, creeping conclusion that a lot of you have probably had at 3 a.m. Maybe credentials aren't enough. Maybe there's something else that everyone else already knows that you somehow missed. So I want to tell you that conclusion isn't wrong. You are missing something. It's just not what you probably think it is. It isn't talent. It isn't age. It isn't the fact that you're newer to this than people who've been doing it for 20 years. It's whether your talk is informational or transformational. And that one distinction explains almost everything else that we're about to talk about. Before I get into that distinction properly, I want to quickly deal with the 3 things most of you have already tried, because I hear these constantly in conversations with speakers just like you. The first is networking, the assumption that if you meet enough people, get in enough rooms, shake enough hands, the bookings will follow, because that's how your old career worked. The trouble is that relationships without positioning don't convert. You can know the right person and still not be booked, because knowing you isn't the same as understanding what specific problem you solve. The second is free or paid stages. The logic here is that visibility equals progress. So the more rooms you speak in, the more inevitable the paid bookings become. Visibility, though, isn't the same as being understood as a need to have. You can speak in front of 500 people and still walk off stage as forgettable. Interesting, nice, but not necessary. The third is reworking the talk itself. Better slides, tighter delivery, more rehearsal, all useful, but none of that fixes a badly translated problem. A well-delivered version of the wrong message is still the wrong message. Here's the actual distinction. An informal talk leaves an audience knowing more than they did before. A transformational talk leaves them thinking, feeling, or doing something differently. And that's the whole difference. And it sounds simple, but almost nobody in a second act gets it right the first time around. Because the instinct that made you valuable in your old career is exactly the instinct that works against you here. You were valuable because you knew things. You shared what you knew. That instinct carries straight into speaking, and it produces talks that inform rather than change. There are 2 families of trapped underneath that distinction. The first is about content, talks that inform instead of transform. The second is about structure, talks that might have the right content but collapse because of how they're built or who they're actually about. The most common one, and the one I want to approach most of the time on really, is the book report trap. This is turning your keynote into the TLDR version of your book or your thesis. You've written the book, you spent years building the argument, and the talk becomes a summary delivery mechanism. You walk the audience through your framework the way you'd walk a reader through a chapter. The problem is that the audience leaves with the Cliff's Notes version of something that they could have read for themselves, and they leave with information, not with transformation. If your keynote could be replaced by someone skimming your introduction chapter or a quick search on ChatGPT, you're in this trap. I've encountered this with a number of second act speakers who fall into this trap because they want to deliver so much value. They have the expertise and they want to share as much of it as possible in a very short time. So having that book done, having that expertise there, you want to transfer that. You almost want to do a download dump into your audience's brains, but it doesn't work. It's not an effective keynote and can end up preventing you from being able to book consulting, workshops, or anything else that you might want to add on when everything feels like it's already been lured in that one keynote, which is probably going to run way longer than the average 45-minute keynote. And it's probably also going to overload and overwhelm your audience, making them unlikely to tell you that. They'll tell you what value they've got from it, but they're going to walk away forgetting most of what you ever talked about. Now, there's also the professor trap, defaulting into the college lecturer mode, comprehensive, structured, credentialed, thorough. It's the instinct of someone who spent an entire career being right, being the authority in the room, and it shows up as a talk that covers everything rather than moving anything. Here's the uncomfortable truth about that one. Audiences don't book professors. They book people who move them. And lecturing is almost the exact opposite of moving someone. The data trap as well, believing the case is made by the numbers. So you load a talk with statistics, charts, proof. Data supports a transformation. It doesn't cause one. You can convince an audience with data and still not have changed anything about how they think, feel, or act. They leave more informed and exactly as static as they arrived. There are also structural traps, and the first is what I call the winging it trap. This is the speaker who knows their material so well, has lived it for decades, that they decide that they don't need a script or a build. They'll just read a room and improvise. Here's the problem. Expertise gives you confidence, but not structure. And those are not the same thing. An unstructured, unformatted talk, however knowledgeable the person giving it is, leaves an audience with no through line to hold on to and no clear moment where something actually shifted. Riffing works in comedy clubs because the form itself allows for it. A keynote isn't that form. Without a build, even brilliant material just becomes an impressive sounding wonder. This really is then about being able to make an impact through things that are practiced, polished, well-timed, rehearsed to a point of being able to riff within that framework, within the confines of what a keynote is supposed to be. You might be able to deliver a perfectly acceptable, winging it, improvised talk with your expertise, but you're not going to ever be able to deliver something that's super polished, has hidden nuances in it, and connects on those deeper levels as you could do with a fully formed keynote. The second is potentially the memoir trap, making the keynote all about you, your journey, your career, your experience, your story. This one is sneaky because it often feels the most authentic to the speaker and can genuinely land emotionally in the room. But if the talk is a monologue, more about what happened to you rather than a translation into what changes for them, you built something moving for you to deliver and forgettable for them to act on. The story is allowed to be in the talk, but it's not allowed to be the point of the talk. Here's why this matters commercially. Informational content in any of these three costumes reads to a booker as nice to have. Interesting, sure. Forgettable, also sure. Unstructured or self-focused delivery undermines the case just as badly, even with strong content underneath, because the audience can't locate the transformation, even if it's technically in there somewhere. This ties back to something I talk about a lot on this show. The test isn't whether your topic is valuable, It's whether the person doing the booking would lose any sleep over the problem that you solve. Describe the way that they describe it, not the way you describe it as the expert. So take a topic like how you show up as a leader, the emotional self at work. Frames the way personal development usually frames it. This becomes emotional mastery. And that phrase alone will lose a lot of corporate buyers before you even said anything else, because it sounds like that inner word, like you're going to make us talk about our emotions, aren't you? Not business outcomes. And a booker isn't paying you to run a retreat. So here's the translation. Don't sell emotional mastery. Sell what its absence costs the business. A leader who shows up defensively, who leads from the need to establish authority rather than the desire for growth, produces specific, countable damage. People stop bringing them problems early. Disengagement creeps in. Good people quietly leave. That's not an abstract personal development idea anymore. That's churn, turnover, that's lost productivity. That's the expensive stuff a booker already loses sleep over. But now flip it. A leader who shows up openly, without judgment, oriented toward growth rather than authority, is functionally a servant leader. And the research and the outcomes on that style are well established. It attracts loyalty, it attracts talent, because people can feel the difference in how they're being led. It reduces churn, increases productivity because the team is more fulfilled and less guarded. Same underlying subject as emotional mastery. It's the same thing. Completely different door, because now it's framed, positioned as a business cost and a business return rather than an inner work concept. So that's the whole exercise in miniature. Nothing about the content changed. What changed is that the pitch stopped being about the speaker's inner world and started being about the audience's bottom line. Here's where I want to leave you, and I want to add one thing before the usual close. None of what I described today requires you to become the world's greatest show person. I want to be really clear about that, because I think a lot of second act speakers hear transformational and quietly translate it as to, I need to become a natural born entertainer or the next Tony Robbins. And that's not it. Some of the worst keynotes I've seen in my life have come from famous, notable people who get booked purely on name recognition and never had to learn any of this. That's a different game built on fame, not skill. And it's not available to you, so it's not a useful yardstick either way. What you actually need is structure and translation, which are learnable, teachable, buildable skills, not a personality transplant. This is more about turning up the dials of what you already have than trying to change you into someone who you're not already. Your credentials made you an expert. Your book, your data, your slides, your story, none of that on its own makes you booked. What gets you booked is whether the audience changes because they were in the room and whether they can feel the shape of that change as it happens, not whether you're the most charismatic person ever to hold the microphone. So this week, write the sentence a booker would use to describe the problem you solve in their words. Then check your current talk against all 5 traps: the book report, the professor, the data, the winging it, memoir, and be honest about which one it's actually built on. Naming it is most of the fix. Now, a quick reminder before I go, the September cohort of Known Booked and Paid Blueprints is what today's episode has been circling the whole way through. The positioning work that turns exactly this kind of translation into a bookable, repeatable offer. You'll have heard more on that before the episode started today, so I won't repeat the pitch, but just don't sit on it if you were nodding along today and thinking, yeah, this is me, I need help with this. Now, if joining a program isn't really where you're at right now, you might want to at least check out the free positioning tool. I'll have the link for that in the show notes, and that will help you to see more clearly whether you're positioned as a nice to have or whether you are a must book speaker. For now, go and do something worth talking about, and I'll see you next time for my interview with Owen Fitzpatrick. Don't miss it.